Hey guys, before we jump into the video, if you haven't watched previous part yet, I've got you covered. The link is in the description. Get ready to dive into an unforgettable tale, where every moment counts and every choice shapes the future. So, sit back, relax, and let the story begin. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot. Fascinated, are you? Did you come alone? Where are your parents? Noticing Harry's gaze, the witch raised an eyebrow. I'm a metamorphmagus. I can change my appearance at will. Wait, are you Harry Potter? The witch suddenly leaned closer, her eyes catching the lightning-shaped scar peeking out from beneath Harry's messy hair. Wait, did I hear that wrong? Or perhaps I heard it wrong. That name, that boy, so familiar, so well known. Harry Potter? The final name was exclaimed simultaneously by two voices, while the earlier lines alternated like a theatrical performance. Harry then saw two red-haired boys pop out from either side of him. Oh, Fred, George, it's you. The witch sighed heavily, as though she'd stumbled upon a major headache. Hey, Tonks, you can't say that, protested one red-haired boy, while his twin added, yeah, as an upperclassman graduating this year, why not show a little more love for your juniors? Exactly. By the way, will you be attending the feast? Fred asked curiously. Of course. Tonks tossed her red hair dramatically. This is my last start-of-term feast at Hogwarts. Even Moody wouldn't be cruel enough to make me miss this special occasion. Oh, an Auror, George said, awestruck. A celebrity from Hufflepuff with the advantage of being a metamorphmagus. I've heard other seventh years are stressing about finding jobs. I'm not an Auror yet, Tonks sighed. I've just been assigned to the Auror office as part of my course training. Only with outstanding performance will I qualify for training. But I'm always clumsy. Ugh, never mind. You lot should hurry inside. And don't forget to bring in our bull boy. Tonks practically spat out the words, her eyes glued to Harry's horns rather than his scar after the initial glance. As if they were old friends, the red-haired twins cheerfully draped their arms around Harry's shoulders, ushering him toward the wall between platforms 9 and 10. I didn't let you down with a terrified expression, did I? Harry raised an eyebrow at the twins after they'd passed through the barrier and noted their expectant expressions. Such childish intentions were all too obvious. Of course not, one of the red-haired boys said, introducing himself. I'm Fred. That's George. We're the Weasley twins. Pleased to meet you. Harry Potter, a Tauren, Harry replied, extending his hand. You've probably recognized my name before I even had the chance. Ha 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 ha. The twins burst out laughing. Harry, you're hilarious. I have a feeling. This year, our prank business is going to enter a new era and reach unprecedented heights. Harry found the twins amusing, too. They had a peculiar habit of finishing each other's sentences with uncanny accuracy, as if their minds were perfectly in sync. Perhaps they really were. Fred, look at this creativity. George's eyes practically sparkled as he exclaimed, such an original idea, a Tauren. Fred clenched his fists in excitement. A magical creature unheard of in the wizarding world. What an astounding concept. It seemed the twins had taken Harry's self-description as a child's imaginative whimsy. Harry, however, had no interest in clarifying. Even more impressive, you've brought it to life on your own head. Such courage and genius. You'll definitely be a Gryffindor, Harry. Exactly. George leaned in to study Harry's horns up close. Transfiguration on the human body? No, wait. This looks more like you transformed objects and attached them to yourself. Either way, your transfiguration skills alone could earn you 30 points from Professor McGonagall. And you haven't even started school yet. Why 30 points? I'd say 50, once school starts, of course. Fred nodded enthusiastically. Though there's also a chance you'll lose 50 points for dangerous self-transfiguration. Gryffindor, minus 50 points. George suddenly mimicked an elderly voice, adopting a stern expression. Ha 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 ha. The twins dissolved into laughter, which, in turn, made Harry chuckle. Though he hadn't yet met Professor McGonagall, he could tell the twins were parodying someone familiar. "Come on, Harry, let us help you with your luggage," Fred said, patting Harry's shoulder. "Even for a Tauren, this stuff's heavy." "Hey, Fred, watch your words," George said in mock seriousness. "Never underestimate the strength of a Tauren." "True, don't underestimate a Tauren's strength," Harry agreed. To their astonishment, he lifted his trunk with ease and climbed aboard the train. Never underestimate the wisdom of a shaman. After months of herbal baths, ample nutrition, and regular exercise, Harry's body had transformed like an inflating balloon. Not into a puff pastry, but into someone visibly stronger and more solid. His shoulders were broader, and he carried a noticeable layer of muscle. "Well, all right," Fred shrugged as he followed Harry onto the train. "From here, Harry, all you need to do is find a compartment you like and enjoy the ride to Hogwarts." "Exactly. If it were next year, we might invite you to our compartment to spend the journey together." "But not this year," George said, wagging a finger. "Not this year," Fred echoed. "We can't disrupt the magical experience of a first-year's train ride, complete with scenic views and the chance to meet new friends. Indeed, those friendships will be your greatest treasures for the next 7 years." The twins made a graceful exit after helping Harry find an empty compartment. They didn't fawn over his fame or treat him any differently. Just a promising junior, a fellow kindred spirit. Harry appreciated that. Their straightforward personalities made them easy to get along with. Though they appeared to thrive on mischief, they had a genuine maturity beneath the surface. Not that Harry particularly needed friends his age or companions to get along with. The bull only needed to stay true to himself. After putting away his luggage, Harry pulled out a book, intending to pass the dull hours ahead. But for now, he wasn't reading. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the train window. He watched parents on the platform bidding their children farewell, their expressions ranging from teary to cheerful. Among the crowd, Harry noticed the platinum-haired boy he'd met at Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, the one who had tried persistently to talk to him but was thoroughly ignored. The boy's father was there too, looking stern, while his mother lavished the boy with hugs and kisses, leaving his face shiny with affection. Harry's attention then shifted to a cluster of red-haired people. Among them were the Weasley twins, unmistakable with their identical grins, presumably surrounded by their family. Quite lively, Harry thought, noting the cheerful energy they radiated. As he adjusted to the invisible tension of being surrounded by so many people, a sudden knock at the compartment door drew his attention. "Come in," Harry called, turning his head. At the door stood a girl with bushy brown hair, struggling to drag her luggage. "Is there an empty seat here?" she asked, slightly breathless. "Of course," Harry replied, adhering to the Tauren principle of helpfulness. He stood up and helped her lift her luggage onto the rack with ease. "You're reading a book? What's it about?" she asked, sitting down. Her words tumbled out in a rapid stream, flowing like a torrent. "I love reading too. I've read so many books, but I'm not sure how much they'll help at Hogwarts. Blah blah blah. Abracadabra, bibbidi-bobbidi-boo." Harry blinked. To him, the latter part of her chatter dissolved into buzzing noises, words that barely registered in his mind. Sure, he could hear her, and on some level he understood each sentence. But the sheer speed and volume of her words overwhelmed him, and his brain automatically tuned her out. Instinct is fascinating, isn't it? Harry wasn't particularly fond of people like this. Back in Azeroth, he'd often fallen victim to Goblin's rapid-fire sales pitches, which inevitably ended with him purchasing items he didn't need, like soap that created massive bubbles but couldn't clean clothes properly. Damn goblins. Tauren don't like them. Hey, are you listening?" Harry snapped back to reality to find the girl glaring at him, her face red and one hand waving furiously in front of his eyes. "Sorry, you were talking too fast and too much. I didn't catch it," Harry admitted honestly. As a Tauren, honesty was a principle he upheld. He never lied, not even white lies. When lying was unavoidable, Harry chose silence. That was exactly how he'd handled Dumbledore earlier. Harry didn't lie. He simply said nothing or shared only what could be said. The girl's glare intensified, her face nearly ablaze. "I was saying," she ground out, spitting each word through gritted teeth. "What are you reading? And why do you have horns?" "I've read the Comprehensive Guide to Magical Creatures, and there's no mention of people with horns. You look like a wizard, so why—" "Stop!" Harry raised a hand. "That's enough. Generally, if a sentence exceeds 3 parts, I can't follow the rest." The girl's anger flared higher. Harry calmly raised his book as if it were a shield. From behind it, he said, "As you can see, I'm a Tauren. You're not prejudiced against other races, are you?" Of course not," she sputtered, trying to contain her frustration. Her eyes flickered toward the book's title, Unveiling the Fog of the Future. "But are you really a Tauren? There's no mention of your kind in any books. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist," Harry said firmly. Fine. I'm sorry," she mumbled, though her curiosity clearly remained. "I've seen that book in a shop before. It's supposed to be a divination textbook at Hogwarts, but the clerk said it was for 3rd years, and 1st years wouldn't need it. Even when I tried to read it, I couldn't make sense of it." "Can you really understand it? You're going past 3 lines again. Mind your own business." Harry's well-meaning reminder earned him a sharp rebuke. He sighed, oddly entertained by her energy. "Honestly, I just wanted to get a sense of what Hogwarts divination class is like," Harry explained, deciding to steer the conversation away from her outburst. "So, you really can understand it?" she asked, her skepticism clear as her brow furrowed. "This book has its useful parts," Harry admitted, closing it with a sigh. "But most of it falls somewhere between useful and completely useless. I didn't expect wizarding divination to be this bad. How can they use something like this to teach students?" "It sounds like you already know divination," she muttered, unable to resist a jab. "That is the professor's chosen textbook, after all." "Of course," Harry replied, raising an eyebrow. "Is there a problem? If divination doesn't allow you to actually foresee the future and make decisions based on it, then it's just a scam. In the Horde, fake prophets like that would get speared. From what I've read so far, most of it is about teaching you how to fool yourself, how to take real-world facts, find vaguely similar symbols or situations and spin a narrative. That's just wrong. I'm a professional shaman and seer. Would I lie to you? A professional seer must dare to make judgments." "Ha!" the young girl scoffed dismissively. "Then why aren't you a professor? If the things in the books aren't correct, why are they recognized by so many in the magical world and even used as school textbooks?" "That's because the most important aspect of divination is talent, and the vast majority of people simply don't possess that talent. Yet they desperately long to foresee the future." Even faced with such skepticism, Harry remained calm and explained evenly, "So they try their best to imitate it. To put it bluntly, and perhaps harshly, magic is a path that requires innate talent to truly excel. And in the field of divination, talent is even more crucial than effort. This is not a discipline where experience or rote memorization will lead to success. People pursue prophecy and divination to avoid bad things happening to them," Harry continued. "And if someone claiming to be a seer cannot help with that, then they're a fraud. Just remember that." "Ha! Who knows if you're telling the truth or not?" the girl retorted. While her reasoning was starting to align with Harry's explanation, her tone remained unconvinced. "If Hogwarts offers it as a class, there must be a good reason." "Want to give it a try?" Harry asked abruptly. "A try at what?" The girl blinked in confusion, caught off guard. Knock, knock, knock. Someone rapped on the compartment door. I heard there's an empty seat here. So, is there still space?" A red-haired boy stood nervously at the door, carrying his luggage. Something about the atmosphere in the compartment made him instinctively uneasy. Swallowing hard, the boy regretted listening to his unreliable twin brother's advice. "Of course," Harry nodded. "There's room. Come in. By the way, Fred and George, what are they to you?" Through the glass window earlier, Harry had noticed this boy among a group of red-haired people. As soon as he entered, the boy's eyes were fixed on Harry's two horns, but he refrained from asking anything. They're my brothers," the red-haired boy said, setting down his luggage and taking a seat. "Do you know them well?" "Just met them. They helped me get onto the platform. Otherwise, I'd probably still be outside." "Oh, well, for once they've done something good." "That's rare," the boy muttered before extending his hand. "I'm Ron Weasley. And you are." As Ron reached out, Harry belatedly realized he had spent so long teasing the girl that he still didn't know her name. Harry Potter. Hermione Granger. A moment of silence filled the compartment. Then, simultaneously, two voices rang out in shock. "Harry Potter? Fred and George never mentioned this." Harry sighed. He knew this would happen. "Are you really Harry Potter?" Ron's face had turned nearly as red as his hair. He stared at Harry, or more specifically, at the scar on his forehead with wide eyes. That. Yes, calm down, will you?" Harry brushed his bangs aside, letting them see the scar clearly. "No need to get so worked up. I'm not that different from you." "Oh, mate, you have no idea how famous you are in the wizarding world," Ron babbled. "We've all grown up hearing your story. And honestly, you've been in the Daily Prophet every day this month. Dad said they even wanted to interview you, but Dumbledore stopped them." "They're overreacting," Harry said flatly. "Is the magical world so uneventful that the smallest news becomes a big deal?" "Sort of, yeah. But I think they're right this time," Ron said, scratching his head. "Especially that photo of you from last month. Ginny even cut it out and put it in her room." "Oh, Ginny's my sister. She's a huge fan of yours." Ron gestured animatedly with his hands. "Anyway, that big stone golem, that was amazing. Dad said most adult wizards couldn't pull that off." "How did you do it?" Harry struggled to keep a straight face. "What? Someone took a photo that day and published it? How did I not notice?" He vaguely recalled Hagrid mentioning a newspaper he'd show Harry when they reached Hogwarts. Be wary of Hagrid, Harry thought. Across from him, Hermione's expression darkened visibly with every passing moment. You're really Harry Potter?" Hermione's voice carried an inexplicable quaver, almost as if she were about to cry. "Then everything you just said, is it true?" Hermione was clearly nervous. Or perhaps, ever since she learned about the existence of the wizarding world a month ago, she had been perpetually on edge. With a naturally competitive and stubborn personality, Hermione had approached the magical world with excitement and curiosity, but also an acute sense of urgency. Coming from a Muggle family, she feared falling behind other students and being ridiculed for it. During the month before term started, she had devoured books, practiced spells, and memorized texts furiously, all to ensure she wouldn't be mocked or left behind. So, when she boarded the train, leaving her parents behind, and entered this compartment, she was already tense. Seeing a boy her age engrossed in a thick book, a third-year textbook she had tried and failed to understand, only heightened her unease. For both wizards and muggles, the ability to foresee the future is an alluring concept. But Harry had just dismissed Hogwarts' divination textbook as incorrect, igniting Hermione's sense of indignation. "What's going on?" Ron asked, confused. "Divination," Hermione exclaimed. "He just said Hogwarts divination textbooks are wrong, and that magical talent is the most important thing." "Oh, is that all?" Unlike Hermione's agitation, Ron's reaction was surprisingly calm. "If anyone else said that, I might not believe them, but he's Harry Potter. If you grew up in the magical world, you'd know most wizards believe Harry Potter was born with immense magical power. Otherwise, he couldn't have defeated you-know-who as a baby." Ron glanced cautiously at Harry, lowering his voice. "Then there's the group who believe Harry's actually a natural-born dark wizard, even more powerful than you-know-who. They think he's destined to, take over the wizarding world or something." Harry couldn't help it, he burst out laughing. "Seriously? These wizards are way too superstitious. Or maybe the existence of magic itself makes them obsess over destiny and chosen one nonsense." "How is that possible?" Hermione said, a bit exasperated. How could a newborn child posse? Harry, is that even possible for you? Her tone suddenly shifted, and the young girl cautiously looked at Harry, doubt creeping into her expression. Harry, impossible, he said firmly, shaking his head. The only reason I survived 11 years ago was because of the magical protection my parents gave me. Don't overthink it. No one knew better than Harry how pitifully powerless he had once been. Hardly the image of a naturally gifted wizard. I knew it. Hermione sighed in relief. Talent is important. Sure. But hard work is just as crucial. Oh, really? Ron, ever the instigator, responded with a smirk that could drive anyone mad. Then why has there only ever been one Dumbledore? Every other wizard pales in comparison. Even who couldn't match him. Strong argument. All right, enough of that, Harry interjected quickly, noticing the two about to start bickering. So, Hermione, do you want to give it a try? Harry had already noticed an interesting trait in the young girl. Before knowing his name, she hadn't believed a word he said. But the moment she learned he was Harry Potter, the famous figure of the wizarding world, she started to waver. A child who deeply respected authority. Try? You mean divination? Hermione's eyes widened in shock. You can do that? Technically, it's scrying. And yes, I can, Harry nodded. Remember what I said earlier? If someone can't predict the future and provide actionable guidance, they're a fraud. Testing this is quite simple. I didn't know you had the gift of prophecy, Harry, Ron exclaimed, growing excited. Can you scry something for me? At this point, Harry realized that Ron's enthusiasm was unshakable. If Harry claimed he was more powerful than Dumbledore, Ron would probably only hesitate for a moment, wondering not if an 11-year-old could truly be so strong, but who between Harry and Dumbledore might be stronger. Hero worship can be a dangerous thing, Harry thought with a sigh, retrieving a simple divination set from the small package Hagrid had given him. A small wooden bowl, a larger stone bowl, and a handful of herbs. That was it. That's it. Hermione's expression was practically screaming doubt. Of course, only those shamans who lack real skill rely on elaborate rituals to seem credible. If you truly have a gift for divination, much of the pomp and ceremony is unnecessary, Harry said casually, placing the herbs into the smaller bowl. Hermione and Ron were too stunned to respond, for as soon as the herbs touched the bowl, they ignited. The fire wasn't orange-red but a fine edge of flames tracing along the leaves, glowing a soft blue-green. Thin, wispy smoke began to rise, but it didn't behave naturally. Defying the laws of physics, the smoke coiled and swirled upward, forming a distinct pillar that floated toward Hermione. It brushed past her ear, slipped through her hair, then poured into the stone bowl like a stream, rippling as if it had a life of its own. Harry murmured a series of incantations under his breath, words that no one could understand, spoken in the language of the Tauren shamans he'd learned in Azeroth. When the last of the smoke flowed into the stone bowl, it settled, looking no different from a bowl of water. Hermione and Ron, holding their breath, stared at the bowl intently. The once dense smoke had condensed into liquid, filling the bottom of the bowl and steadily accumulating until it was about half full. Finally, the residual smoke dissipated, curling around the bowl's edges. What remained in the center was a glowing, pale blue liquid that shimmered faintly. It's ready, Harry said softly. Treat your destiny with care, child. This divination magic, perfected during his time in Azeroth with Jaina's guidance, was a blend of his unique talents and research. It was the very skill that had earned him the title of Shaman Prophet among the Tauren. For Harry, the act of guiding someone's destiny was something he hadn't done in a long time, long enough to forget that he was technically still a child himself. But for Hermione and Ron, such thoughts were irrelevant. In the glowing water at the center of the bowl, an image began to ripple and take shape. It was Hermione, sitting on a toilet, sobbing uncontrollably. Her wizard's robe was askew, and though she clutched her wand, she looked utterly miserable. That's not me! Hermione shrieked instinctively, Her face flushed a deep red. She slapped the surface of the water, scattering the smoke and liquid in an instant. But none of that mattered anymore. Like an enraged lioness, Hermione leapt to her feet, one hand still pressed against the bowl as she glared furiously at the two witnesses to her supposed future. What kind of magic is this? It's utterly wicked, Hermione protested indignantly. This is the divination you asked for. You simply saw a moment of your future. There's nothing wicked about it, Harry said, refusing to accept her accusations. That's not me. Hermione's voice rose, more flustered than ever. I think it's you. Right? Ron scratched his head. But look, the emblem on your robe. It's Gryffindor. Does this mean you'll be sorted into Gryffindor tonight? It's an illusion, a hallucination. It's not real. Hermione snapped, nearly shouting. I won't cry. She forced the word out, brimming with indignation. Really? But if it's predicting the future, we'll know for sure tonight when you're sorted into Gryffindor. Right? Ron said, a rare moment of insight flashing through his otherwise scatterbrained thoughts. Hermione was at a loss for words. She sat back down with a huff, her face red and her posture stiff, looking every bit as puffed up as an offended cat. Hermione had always held Gryffindor close to her heart. It was the house of Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the 20th century, so her books declared. And now, Dumbledore was the headmaster of Hogwarts. To Hermione, Gryffindor was unquestionably the best house, no debate needed. The mere thought of being sorted into her dream house filled her with joy. But an intrusive memory of herself crying by the water crept into her mind, casting a shadow over her excitement. She hoped that particular vision would prove false. And so she sulked. How embarrassing. Oh, Harry, I knew it. They were right when they said you're not just an ordinary wizard, Ron exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement after witnessing Harry's divination. Can you predict something for me, too? It's divination, not fortune-telling, and I'm no different from any other wizard. Calm down, Harry replied, trying to rein in Ron's enthusiasm. His words, however, seemed to have little effect. As Harry lit the incense again, its unique fragrance transformed into blue smoke, which drifted lazily past Ron before settling over the stone basin. The water inside rippled as the smoke swirled above it. Ron's figure materialized in the watery surface. Even Hermione, despite her earlier sulking, was drawn closer by sheer curiosity. What incredible magic! In the vision, Ron, well, he didn't look great. Leaning against a wall, he appeared nervous and dejected, as if being reprimanded by someone. The eerie, green-tinged surroundings only heightened the unsettling atmosphere. Ha! You got detention from a professor, Hermione exclaimed, momentarily forgetting her own concerns. Don't worry, Harry reassured a visibly shaken Ron. Divination isn't set in stone. People seek it to avoid the worst outcomes, after all. Oh, I just hope the professor doesn't write home to Mum, Ron groaned, rubbing his temples in despair. Meanwhile, Harry's mind wandered. Both divinations, Hermione's and Ron's, had revealed events seemingly close in time. Their appearances hadn't changed significantly in the visions, suggesting the magic was limited to glimpses of the near future. But Harry had aimed for something different. He wanted to divine their distant futures, hoping to show them their grown-up selves. The results puzzled him. Could it be a side effect of this different world? Harry mused silently. I'll need to refine the magical construct. Harry? Harry! Hermione's voice snapped him back to reality. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Can I learn your divination magic? She asked eagerly, her enthusiasm spilling over. You can, but also can't, Harry replied thoughtfully. He decided honesty was the best course. The first, can, means you're capable of learning the magic. The second, can't, means you probably won't become a seer capable of perceiving far-off futures. Why? Hermione's voice wavered, her excitement giving way to disbelief. Because you lack the talent, Harry said bluntly. As I mentioned earlier, being a seer depends more on innate ability than effort. During the earlier divination, Harry had assessed Hermione's sensitivity to spiritual energy. The verdict? She had some, but not much. As for Ron, he was firmly in the can't perceive a thing category. It was a harsh reality. Hermione looked utterly crushed. Did Harry realize how devastating his words were to someone like her? A muggle-born filled with wonder about magic and eager to prove herself? For Hermione, who had silently vowed to excel in the wizarding world, those 4 words, "You lack the talent," felt like a punch to the gut. Ron, surprisingly, took it in stride. "Oh, don't be silly, Hermione," he said, pulling out a sandwich his mum had packed. "True seers are as rare as dragon eggs. The ones who can see the future will only pop up every few centuries. No point getting upset over it." "I'm not upset," Hermione snapped, though her watery eyes betrayed her. It's not that you have no talent," Harry interjected, trying to soften the blow. As a kind-hearted person, he hated making anyone cry. With enough effort, you could still reach a basic level of divination, though your visions might be unclear and limited. Most people, even with training, can only glimpse fragments, brief flashes of what might happen in the next day or two, maybe a couple of weeks. The images are usually disjointed and lack context. They're lucky if they can tell whether something is good or bad. And many others, Harry continued, can only develop vague intuitions, gut feelings about outcomes, or nothing at all. It was the truth. Not everyone was destined to become a seer. "Really?" Hermione asked tentatively. "I can still learn?" If sheer effort could elevate her above the average wizard, she decided she could live with that. "Of course," Harry confirmed. "For those with even a little talent, I'm happy to teach them the shamanic path." Part of Harry's willingness to demonstrate his unique magic was tied to a greater goal: identifying like-minded individuals who might join the organization he envisioned. Starting from scratch was possible, but allies would make the journey much smoother. After all, reviving the elemental power of an entire world was not something Harry could, or should, undertake alone. Planting the seeds of shamanism in this world was a worthy pursuit. "Children, you talk like you're much older than us," Hermione muttered, discreetly wiping her eyes. "And why shamanism? Aren't we wizards?" "Of course we are," Harry replied warmly. "But I'm not just a wizard. I'm also a shaman. If you're interested, I can explain more over time." "Why not now?" Ron asked. "Because someone's coming," Harry answered. As if on cue, a knock sounded at the compartment door. Ron opened it to find a boy standing there, his tear-streaked face full of confusion. His chubby cheeks gave him an endearing, innocent look. "Have you seen my toad?" "What?" Hermione didn't understand. "A toad. A wizard's pet," Ron explained helpfully, adding, "Shouldn't it be with you? Wizard pets usually don't wander off. They're quite smart." "Oh, Merlin, I can't find it anywhere." The boy looked like he was on the verge of tears. "Trevor, my Trevor." "All right, I get it. Don't cry just yet." Hermione took a deep breath and stood up. "I'll help you find this, Trevor. Do you two want to come along?" "Why not?" Harry closed his book and stood up. "Not like we've got anything better to do." Ron was happy to join as well. Harry admired Hermione's initiative. Kindness like hers deserved encouragement. He was beginning to think he'd made the right choice in befriending these two. "Thank you. Thank you so much. My name's Neville. Neville Longbottom." The round-faced boy introduced himself excitedly. What followed was a round of polite introductions and, much to Harry's exasperation, the inevitable, "Oh my gosh, you're Harry Potter," an expression that, in his opinion, was far more annoying than going door to door asking about a missing toad. "Something funny?" Harry raised an eyebrow as he surveyed the compartment they had just opened. It was filled with an overwhelming amount of silver and green, the snake motif everywhere. A clear nod to Slytherin House. According to the books Harry had read, they were notoriously proud of their emblem. This compartment was noticeably more extravagant than others. The interior had been magically expanded, and the table was laden with lavish snacks and drinks. Clearly, no expense was spared here. The occupants varied in age. Alongside a few first years, there were students from other years chatting and laughing. But the moment Hermione knocked and asked about Neville's toad, the laughter stopped. The students exchanged glances, then burst into mocking, malicious laughter, a sound dripping with ridicule and hostility. Harry instinctively stepped forward, shielding Hermione behind him. Calmly, he asked, "What's so funny? No one cares about a toad, you filthy little mudblood. Now get out of our compartment," sneered a freckled boy, baring his teeth at Hermione, though Harry's presence blocked him. Another round of laughter erupted. "Hey, you can't just say that." Ron, furious, made to charge forward, but Harry stopped him. "Really, mate? With those skinny arms? Who are you going to beat?" Still, Harry had to commend Ron's courage. "Apologize." Harry's sharp gaze swept across the compartment. His voice was cold and commanding. "Or you'll regret it." Harry recognized the slur from his readings. Mudblood, the most vile insult pureblood wizards used for Muggleborns. His hand hovered over the war hammer strapped to his waist but paused. "No need to use that on a bunch of brats." "Apologize." A boy in Slytherin robes laughed derisively, the crest of his house prominently displayed on his chest. "And what will you do if we don't? Who do you think you are? Right? And isn't that the Weasley disgrace?" Chimed in a blonde boy Harry recognized from earlier. Draco Malfoy sneered. "My father was right. Red hair, freckles, and so poor they can't afford anything." Ha 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 ha. The laughter escalated. If not for Harry's grip, Ron would have lunged by now. "Wait a second," someone suddenly said, his gaze shifting curiously to Harry. "Look at him on his forehead. That scar. Harry Potter?" "Apologize," Harry repeated, cutting off the inevitable hysteria of recognition. His stance was steady, and he was prepared for a fight. "Peft!" A boy snorted dismissively. "This is our so-called savior? This is all he is. You. So that day, you ignored me on purpose?" Malfoy's face turned red with rage. "How dare you ignore a Malfoy?" "That's right," Harry replied evenly. "You were noisy, and I didn't like anything you said. I only compare the lineage of livestock to see which produces more milk or meat. You dare insult the purity of wizarding blood?" Harry's words were like a stone tossed into a pond. Except in this compartment, they ignited a wave of outrage among the Slytherins. Mixing with filthy mudbloods and flaunting those ridiculous horns? Who do you think you are? Some kind of freak? Good. Words are no longer necessary. The conflict escalated in an instant, catching everyone off guard. And it was Harry who struck first, despite being outnumbered and outsized. "Hide, all three of you!" Harry roared as he slammed his fist into the face of the boy who had mocked his horns. "For the Horde!" His punch landed squarely on the boy's nose, leaving it bent and bleeding profusely. "He hit me. Get him. Get him. Locktar Ogre. Victory or death." The battle cry erupted from Harry with an intensity that stunned everyone nearby. Size and numbers didn't matter. Victory was about the fighting spirit, a spirit Harry had in abundance. Fists flew, and Harry's every punch elicited howls of pain. The sound of his attackers' blows striking his body was almost metallic, and the pain reverberating up their arms made their faces turn pale. For the younger Slytherins, their limited knowledge of magic made fists seem more practical, while the older students had better options. But Harry had anticipated this. When a burly upperclassman drew his wand, Harry wasted no time. From his waist, he drew the war hammer and roared, "Hammer throw!" Under no circumstances could Harry allow senior students to use magic. If they did, he would be forced to defend himself using magic, a skill he had yet to fully master in this world. Resorting to the magic of Azeroth, however, seemed excessive. Even defensive spells carried immense destructive power. The memory of Uncle Vernon's house being obliterated by an earth shield was still fresh in Harry's mind. And now they were aboard a speeding train. Magic in Azeroth was primarily honed for war, a stark contrast to the subtler spells of the wizarding world. Thus, Harry decided that against these senior Slytherins, it was better to rely on his trusty Warhammer. As long as he refrained from enchanting it with Fire Tongue or Wind Fury, it would remain within acceptable safety limits. Yes, absolutely within safety limits. Harry was certain of that as he watched the arm of a senior Slytherin boy holding a wand twist unnaturally. The boy's face contorted in pain as he doubled over. Exiting the battle early seemed like a wise choice for him. Flint! A girl's scream pierced the air, but instead of quelling the fight, it seemed to heighten the fervor. Despite Hagrid's earlier warnings about Slytherins being selfish, cunning, and despicable, Harry couldn't help but admire their unity at this moment. They were, at the very least, united in their hostility toward him. With that in mind, shield toss. This time, Harry wasn't aiming to break another arm. Retrieving his shield from his back, he hurled it toward the senior Slytherin girl who had raised her wand at him. He had no idea what spell she might cast. If it were dark magic, it could be disastrous. With a loud clang, the girl crumpled to the floor. Get him! He's just one person. A first year. Shouts and cries echoed around the carriage, turning the scene into utter chaos. When curious onlookers from neighboring compartments came to investigate, the commotion only grew. Though Harry had told Ron, Hermione, and Neville to stay out of the fight, none of them listened. Ron and Neville immediately tackled Malfoy and his two lackeys. Hermione, true to her nature, initially tried to mediate, until a Slytherin first-year girl punched her square in the face. That was when Hermione decided to join the fray. For young witches and wizards who had yet to master any substantial magic, their primary method of combat was, unsurprisingly, brute force. When students from adjacent compartments arrived, they found the carriage packed with bodies, all tangled in an incomprehensible brawl. Ron! What the bloody hell? Fred and George Weasley stood in stunned disbelief, watching their usually reserved younger brother in the thick of a fight on his very first day of school. Their shock quickly turned to pride. Their little brother, taking on Slytherins on day one? That was the epitome of Gryffindor spirit. Let's join the fun. Any friend of Gryffindor unite! With loud cheers, Fred and George led a group of upper-year Gryffindors into the fray. Meanwhile, Slytherins from other carriages joined the battle as well. For Gryffindor! The rallying cry followed Harry's war shout. For Slytherin! Not to be outdone, the opposing house roared back. For Harry Potter! That one belonged to the lunatics. Words alone couldn't capture the sheer chaos of the carriage. From the magically expanded compartments to the narrow corridors of the train, students rolled and tumbled in a massive brawl. In another world, this scene might have been described as an all-out melee. While some fought, others watched from the sidelines, and a few brave souls tried to break up the chaos. Like Tonks. As a seventh-year Auror trainee, Tonks had accompanied the train to Hogwarts as a security measure after helping maintain order on the platform. Logically, Tonks should have been the perfect person to stop this madness. Unfortunately, she couldn't even get close to the center of the fight. The sheer density of students wrestling on the ground left her stranded at the edges, shouting futilely while waving her wand. Her hair changed colors so rapidly in her frustration that she resembled a traffic light, almost as if she were cheering for the fight instead of trying to stop it. Eventually, Tonks slumped to the floor in despair, realizing she was bound to face reprimands from both her professors and superiors. For a final year at Hogwarts, this was certainly an explosive start. The start of term feast was a significant event for the Hogwarts staff every year, especially for welcoming new students. The house elves in the kitchen prepared every dish with care. Filch meticulously cleaned the castle, and the professors added finishing touches to the decorations. This year, however, was even more special. It marked the arrival of Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the legend who had saved the wizarding world 11 years ago. Everything was progressing smoothly, just as it had for decades, except in one particular corner of the Great Hall. Unlike the calm and order elsewhere, this corner was stormy. Never in all my years. First years leading a brawl on the train, pulling upper-year students into the fray. 2 entire houses involved, and the rest only uninvolved because they couldn't physically reach the fight. This is utterly outrageous. Professor McGonagall raged, struggling to find the words to describe the situation. Oh, calm yourself, Minerva. It's not as dire as it seems, Dumbledore replied with his usual composure. Hearing the reports from the train seemed to faze him not in the slightest. In fact, he even tried to comfort the seething deputy headmistress. It was no wonder Dumbledore remained unruffled. He had weathered far greater storms before. Calm down? How do you expect me to calm down? Professor McGonagall's lips were pressed into a line so sharp it could cut steel. You can't possibly imagine what I saw when I arrived. That child. He was standing atop a pile of students sprawled on the floor, groaning in pain. In the entire compartment, he was the only one still standing, and he was wearing chainmail stained with blood. Do you have any idea how I felt when I saw him? I nearly fainted on the spot. He treats Hogwarts like what exactly? Why on earth was he dressed like that? Oh, I suppose young Harry might have indulged in some Muggle-inspired fantasies about Hogwarts, Dumbledore said with a light chuckle. There's a certain childlike charm in that. Wouldn't you agree, Minerva? Dumbledore looked like he had more to say, but under McGonagall's withering glare, he wisely chose to stay silent. I don't think we need to overreact, Professor McGonagall, Snape interjected, his tone uncharacteristically calm, especially considering his own house was one of the two involved in the brawl. He had been agitated earlier, but a certain piece of information had clearly changed his demeanor. First, this incident occurred on the train, and term hasn't officially started yet. Technically, it's still the holidays, so our authority to punish them is limited, Snape said slowly. Second, it was merely a student brawl, hardly unusual between Gryffindor and Slytherin. Merely a student brawl, McGonagall echoed, staring at Snape as if he'd suddenly sprouted horns. I never thought I'd hear those words coming from you, Professor Snape. I expected something more along the lines of expulsion. I happen to agree with Professor Dumbledore. Spirited students are a good thing. Even if some are a bit too spirited, Snape replied, his tone stiff but his words unmistakably his own. McGonagall briefly considered whether Snape might be under an Imperius curse. This year was shaping up to be an odd one, after all. But a glance at Dumbledore, still cheerfully munching on his sweets, convinced her otherwise. The headmaster popped another candy into his mouth with relish. McGonagall inhaled sharply. Regardless, we need to ensure they understand the severity of their actions, especially Harry Potter. Merlin, help us. I dread to think what kind of trouble he'll get into once term starts. Of course, I agree completely, Snape nodded. However, Professor McGonagall, we must remember to prioritize education over punishment in our dealings with students. As for Harry Potter, well, he does exhibit remarkable leadership qualities, doesn't he? McGonagall had heard enough. After giving Snape a long, incredulous look, she stormed out, muttering words like unbelievable, madness, and heavens above under her breath. I believe Professor McGonagall would agree that I have a point, Snape remarked smoothly, meeting the gazes of Dumbledore and the other two heads of houses. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have preparations to attend to. With a dramatic swirl of his black robes, Snape exited the hall, leaving Professors Sprout and Flitwick behind. Though neither wanted to admit it, their own houses had students involved in the massive brawl. Do you think Professor Snape has fallen in love? Flitwick asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Cough, cough, cough. Sprout choked on her tea before bursting into laughter. Really, Phileas? Oh, I fear my potions master hasn't reached that milestone just yet, Dumbledore said with a hearty laugh. But I do hope. Oh, how I hope, ha ha ha. The corner of the hall filled with cheerful laughter, a sharp contrast to the grim atmosphere awaiting the students. The professor's jovial mood, of course, wasn't something they displayed to the students. After all, professionalism dictated that fighting, especially large-scale brawls, was completely unacceptable. And at that age, most students were still terrified of their teachers. The massive train brawl had been stopped by none other than Professor McGonagall herself, who had apparat directly onto the scene after receiving a report from Tonks. It was like Moses parting the Red Sea, except instead of water, McGonagall had parted a writhing pile of bodies. Faced with the ferocious deputy headmistress, the lioness of Gryffindor herself, even the rowdiest students had meekly retreated into corners. After delivering a thorough scolding and promising punishments once term began, McGonagall had stormed off, leaving behind several compartments full of subdued students. The scene inside? Anyone who opened the door would find rows of students bound tightly together, resembling prisoners in a transport cart. Knowing what awaited them at Hogwarts, even the most boisterous students couldn't muster much cheer. Punishments, detentions, but kids are kids, and their despondence didn't last long. Soon enough, the compartments were buzzing with chatter, as students bragged about how many opponents they'd taken down or how they'd managed to pummel their least favorite rivals, especially in Harry's compartment. Despite still being bound by ropes conjured by McGonagall, the cheers for Harry grew louder and louder. Even without seeing him, students shouted their admiration and praises in his direction. "You really should have stayed out of it," Harry said, looking helplessly at Ron and his friends. "There were too many of them, and they were all older and bigger than you." "Don't say that, Harry," Ron replied, his face swollen and his voice muffled. "We're the same age. If you were fighting, how could we just hide? I'm Ron Weasley. Weasleys never back down from a Malfoy. The honor of the Weasley name rests squarely on my shoulders." Even though Ron's face was swollen like a pig's head, it couldn't hide his exhilaration. This was a rush he had never experienced before, a moment of attention he had never known. Even Fred and George had praised him just now. Many other Gryffindors, ones he didn't even know, had commended his bravery. His bravery, Ron Weasley's bravery. And it had nothing to do with his brothers. The feeling of being in the spotlight and receiving praise was something Ron had never experienced. At home, he was usually the one who got the least attention. But now, confidence? Ron felt so triumphant that he imagined savoring this memory well into old age. "That's right, Harry. Don't say things like that," Neville mumbled through his own injuries. Harry shook his head, unsure of what to say. Still, he had to admit, he was rather pleased. These kids were pretty great. Sure, the Gryffindors were known for being calm and kind, but brave Gryffindors didn't shy away from conflict either. Harry knew he could fight because he understood his own strength. But Ron, Neville, and Hermione joining in? That was pure loyalty, a refusal to tolerate injustice. It was because of the slur Mudblood, because Harry made the first move. As the trio who initially engaged, Ron and Neville had taken quite a beating. Double fists couldn't fend off 4 attackers, and even Hermione hadn't escaped unscathed, though her injuries were lighter because, as an 11-year-old girl, some of the attackers had hesitated to go all out. Speaking of Hermione, "We're going to be expelled for sure. Expelled on the first day of school. My dream of studying magic. Gone. Completely gone." Hermione sobbed uncontrollably. This was the same girl who had confidently proclaimed during divination class that she would never cry. Now she was crying so hard she'd completely forgotten her earlier vow. "I've never even been in a fight before. We're doomed. The professors will write to my parents, and they'll come to take me away. Wawa." "Don't worry, Hermione," Ron said, his face still swollen and his words muffled. "If your parents are muggles, they can't exactly come to Hogwarts to get you." "Is that the point?" Hermione shrieked. "We should have been calmer. No matter what, we shouldn't have fought. I really appreciate you all." Hermione sobbed harder. "Even though I don't know exactly what mudblood means, I know they were insulting me. And you all got dragged into it because of me. Now we're all getting expelled." Her tears turned into a torrential downpour. Yes, fighting was indeed wrong. A voice chimed in. Someone bound up in ropes wriggled closer. The speaker was another redhead, looking just as furious. "But what's worse is not listening to the prefect. I told everyone to step back, but someone had the audacity to sucker punch me." Earlier, Ron had introduced this person as one of his brothers, Percy Weasley, this year's Gryffindor prefect. To be fair, Percy had initially tried to separate the brawling students. But after a punch knocked his glasses off, he'd been dragged into the chaos. Truthfully, Percy suspected the first punch had come from a Gryffindor, probably George or maybe Fred. The scene had been too chaotic to remember clearly. A Gryffindor hitting their prefect? Impossible. But maybe? This was precisely why Percy now looked so grumpy and indignant. He hadn't found the culprit, had been scolded by Professor McGonagall for failing in his prefect duties, and was now tied up like the rest. "Don't worry, kids. We won't be expelled," Percy said, attempting a comforting tone. His bruised face undermined the effect, but he tried. "It's just a fight. And with this many students involved, Hogwarts won't expel everyone." "Exactly," another Gryffindor chimed in nonchalantly. "Last year, when the 6th and 7th years had that brawl in the hallway, it was way worse. Full-on spell dueling. The hospital wing ran out of beds, and Professor McGonagall nearly lost her mind." "Hogwarts is this chaotic?" Hermione looked completely dumbfounded. "Oh, young lady," the Gryffindor laughed heartily. "There are things more important than house points and detentions." "That's right, Gryffindor's honor." Fred, or maybe George, shouted excitedly as he wriggled closer. "We won this time. Those stupid snakes were beaten to a pulp. If Professor McGonagall hadn't shown up, not one of them would have been left standing." "Exactly, Hermione. Don't sweat the small stuff. Let's celebrate," Ron added enthusiastically. "You don't even know how filthy that word they used to insult you was. And they were the ones who started it. Right in front of the professors. Not to mention, they insulted my horns. That's species discrimination," Harry said, trying to comfort the still terrified Hermione. "You know, right? Discrimination is horrible." Hermione glanced at Harry's horns and decided to say nothing. "Exactly. Fred, or George, who could tell?" shouted again. "Those stupid snakes dared to insult our mighty Tauren. Harry, you're a born Gryffindor. The word courage was invented just for you. You'll be the future Lion King." "Wait, why not the Tauren Lion King? Tauren Lion King? George, that's brilliant. What a magnificent title. Tauren Lion King. Tauren Lion King." The chant quickly gained momentum. First, it was just Fred and George shouting. Then the entire box joined in. Soon, the chants echoed across several boxes. The kind of noise that could make Professor McGonagall faint. Youth. A time of energy, rebellion, and sheer vitality. As for punishments and detentions, well, that could wait until they got back to school. A group of soon-to-be-punished individuals had at least been freed from the ropes binding them when they got off the train. Let's just say Professor McGonagall was extremely reluctant to do this, and considering that first-year students needed to cross the lake by boat to reach the castle, she gave Harry and his group a stern warning not to cause trouble while aboard. Harry didn't take it to heart. It seemed Professor McGonagall regarded him as some show-off brat, but Harry knew he wasn't like that. A Tauren only does what needs to be done, regardless of what others say. "Duck!" From the front boat, Hagrid shouted the command as the flotilla passed under a bridge. Truth be told, the bridge's height only required Hagrid himself to duck. As they emerged from beneath the bridge, Hogwarts suddenly came into full view for all the young wizards. A truly magnificent castle. But that description didn't quite do it justice. It was more accurate to say that the entire lake, the surrounding forest, and this whole region belonged to Hogwarts, including the wizarding village of Hogsmeade mentioned in the books. Harry found the castle rather charming. Many fairy tales had painted such castles as magical and full of wonder. And, of course, in the realm of adventures, castles often promised treasure. Simply delightful. Legend has it that 1,000 years ago, the 4 founders of the school traveled along this very path and built Hogwarts atop the cliff. Hermione spoke up, momentarily forgetting her tears. Her eyes shone with admiration as she gazed at the castle under the moonlight. "I read about it in Hogwarts. A history. This is probably part of some enchantment," Harry mused, looking at his hand. "Since earlier, I felt a sort of invisible magic surrounding us." "What do you mean?" Ron asked, bewildered. I mean, walking this path, the very route the founders took when they established the school, is likely a ceremonial magic. My guess is that it serves as a protective ward or curse repellent. After all, this is a school for training young wizards, Harry explained thoughtfully. And isn't there supposed to be a sorting ceremony coming up? Oh, right, Ron nodded. But no one will tell me how the sorting works. Fred says it's really painful, terrifying. Neville, any news from your side? No. Neville shook his head nervously. Gran wouldn't tell me anything either. She just said to be careful. Honestly, I'm probably going to be the first student ever sent home for failing the sorting ceremony. Oh, that won't happen, Neville, Ron reassured him. Don't forget today's achievements. You're definitely a brave Gryffindor. Ron's words seemed to calm Neville significantly. As for Hermione, she was already quietly reviewing her knowledge points. After disembarking the boats, the group followed Hagrid to the castle's grand entrance, where Professor McGonagall was waiting. She walked straight up to Harry. "You've done something truly impressive, Mr. Potter," she said, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Before you, no first-year student had ever caused such a commotion before even starting school. Frankly, I should break your wand and send you home. Perhaps only then you'd learn what caution and obedience mean." "I'm sorry, Professor. If someone has to be expelled, let it be me. It's all because of me that—" Hermione broke into tears before Harry could respond, her voice trembling with guilt. The young girl firmly believed the fight had started because someone had insulted her. "It wasn't Hermione's fault. They provoked us first, Professor." "I don't think we should be punished," Harry replied calmly, unfazed by McGonagall's words. "They called Hermione a mudblood, hurled slurs at me, and mocked my horns. If anyone should be expelled, start with all the Slytherins in that compartment. Otherwise, I'll write to the Daily Prophet and let the wizarding community decide for themselves." Professor McGonagall took a deep breath. "This isn't your fault, Miss Granger," she said kindly to Hermione, the quintessential model student. "Don't worry, you won't be expelled. What I want to address now is Mr. Potter's behavior." She had already heard from Dumbledore about the boy who lived insisting he was a Tauren and had mentally prepared herself. But some things were still hard to endure. "Mr. Potter," McGonagall said gravely, "I must remind you that human transfiguration is incredibly dangerous. It can lead to irreparable harm, especially for someone like you, with limited knowledge and undeveloped magical reserves. You're lucky this time. It was a well-intentioned warning." McGonagall could tell that Harry's horns weren't the result of transfiguring his body, but rather a spell to attach actual bull horns to his forehead. Even so, this was highly advanced for a first-year student. "I don't know what you mean, Professor," Harry said sincerely. "Taurens naturally have horns. It's completely normal for us." McGonagall closed her eyes. She felt this year would bring her nothing but trouble, huge trouble. Difficult students, mysterious disappearances of house points, stress-induced hair loss, and an insatiable craving for tranquility. The house cup. Oh, my house cup. She had already mentally assigned Harry to Gryffindor. With everything he'd done, who would believe he wouldn't end up there? McGonagall kept chanting to herself. Geniuses are eccentric. Geniuses are eccentric. Albus Dumbledore's peculiar habits often seemed mad to others. And based on everything so far, the boy who lived was undoubtedly a magical prodigy. She reopened her eyes. "Hand over your hammer and shield, Mr. Potter," McGonagall said with great effort. "Hogwarts does not permit weapons." "Of course, Professor," Harry complied without hesitation. But as McGonagall took 2 steps forward with the items, she swiftly turned back and shoved them into Harry's arms. "Absolutely no pointing weapons at your classmates again. Understood, Mr. Potter?" she said furiously. "Or I really will expel you." Harry agreed far too quickly. The swiftness of his response made McGonagall uneasy. From her decades of teaching experience, students who repented so fast were often the most incorrigible, the kind who never learned their lessons. The repeat offenders. The troublemakers.
Thanks for waiting for next episode.